Hi, this podcast will be about why the USA and the USSR became rivals in 1945 to 1950. The USA and the USSR are often seen as sworn enemies, but the Second World War brought the once thought impossible alliance of the two powers to an end. This rarity was perhaps seen as a golden opportunity by President Roosevelt, whose desire for negotiations can be seen in the Yalta Conference in February 1945. Why then they did become rivals from 1945 to 1950 can be considered due to be from several factors, of which includes their histories, ideologies, leaders, and events in that period. Initial rivalries of the two countries date back to the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, where the USA had aided the proletariat government and had sent troops to intervene. It is common to see this as the symbol of the declining relationship between the two countries, for the only other period whereby they had allied together was during World War I, and the USA had only joined the fray in the later part of the war. Why the two nations seldom come to terms with each other can be accounted for their goals and beliefs as well. While they may share the same aim of spreading influence and consequently gain power, their ideologies are polar opposites of each other. In a speech delivered in March 1947, President Truman sums up these differences as,
"One way of life is based upon the will of the majority and is distinguished by free institutions, representative government, free elections, guarantees of individual liberty, freedom of speech and religion, and freedom from political oppression. The second way of life is based upon the will of a minority, forcibly imposed upon the majority. It relies upon terror and oppression, a controlled press and radio, fixed elections, and the suppression of personal freedoms."
Although this clearly gives an American perspective of matters, from this speech it can also be seen how Truman was beyond considering cooperation with the Soviet Union, but rather he was already seeing them as an absolute rival. This brings us to the next factor, which is about Truman and Stalin themselves. For Truman, he is well known to be a religious and anti-communist individual who was unexpectedly brought to presidency upon the sudden death of Roosevelt. Naturally, he took a firm stance against Stalin in order to create a strong image of himself before the American public and before Stalin. His inflexibility to change is further enforced by how appeasement had led to Hitler's continuous rise to power, and also by a general fear of communism itself. As for Stalin, he too is fearful, but in his case, he is fearful of losing power. This phobia can be seen to have escalated during the purges of the old Bolshevik members. And from this, it can also be seen how Stalin is ruthless and unyielding, perhaps more so than Truman himself. These factors are what caused an accumulation of distrust between the two nations, and this distrust can be seen to re-emerge after the Second World War in the form of a series of events. One of these events was the follow-up meeting to the Yalta Conference in Potsdam, whereby Truman deliberately provoked Stalin by hinting to him about the atomic bomb. Ironically, Stalin had already known about the bomb through Soviet spies, but Truman had not been forthcoming about it, which initiated the two being on bad terms with each other. The long telegram in response to Stalin's speech in February 1946 and Churchill's Iron Curtain speech a month later brought US and Russian relations into further decline. The fear of communism was transformed into the urgency to contain its spread, leading later to the Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan. That is not to say that Russia did nothing provocative as well. Russia's mass murder of Polish military officers in the Katian Forest in 1940, their intervention in Eastern Europe between 1946 to 1948, and the Berlin blockade also caused relations to worsen with the US. Overall, why the USA and the USSR had become rivals between 1945 to 1950 can be said to be due to the merging of several factors that include past conflicts, differing beliefs, coupled with the contrasting personalities and actions of Truman and Stalin.